Hi there. You made it back for lesson 5. In this lesson, we are tackling two main things. One is I've got a couple new rules to show you. And yes, I said rules, as in I have been holding out on 2 rules of the game that I have not told you about. And here it is, the 5th video, and I've held out some rules on you. They're kind of subtle rules, and I didn't want to hit you with them too early. I wanted you to explore the game and just get to know the pieces. But it's important to know these 2 rules. So we're going to cover those, and then we're going to look at 2 games, not from me, but from some kind of beginner level players that I just found online. I don't know these people. And I've got a purpose on why I selected their game, so we'll sort of talk about that. Well, okay, you may have noticed that the pieces are looking a little bit different than they have been in my previous videos. That's because I switched over to Lee Chess for this video. It's just a different chess website. I like to alternate between the two, and I've got another one I use from time to time. So I just thought we'd hop over to Lee Chess for this one. So I've got a game started out here, and it is white to move. And for this silly example, that we're going to say that they don't like this queen all up in their business, so they're going to put a little pressure. They're going to move their pawn, which is now threatening this queen. Queen's going to move over, capture this bishop, and white is going to want to castle to kind of get their king to safety. However, and this is one of the new rules that it's not a new rule, it's just a rule I haven't told you yet. This queen is not attacking the king directly, but she's covering this whole line. So if the king wanted to castle, he would have to move over 1 and move over 2, and then the rook would swing over, and he'd have to walk right through this danger line right here. He'd have to walk right through the line of fire. And so therefore it's not allowed. If you try this in a game, it just won't let you. So you can't castle through check, right? You can't put your king in danger, even though it's just temporary and he's going to the other side, because there's no way for him to get across this line of danger. Let's say white does something else in the meantime, and black instead moves here. So now the king is directly in danger, and same thing, you cannot castle out of danger. You can't get yourself out of danger by castling. It's just one of those rules that says, well, we're not going to let you do this really cool thing with your king and tucking him into a corner and bringing the rook around. We're not going to let you do that when you're in the line of fire, right? Whether it's walking through the line of fire or whether you're directly in the line of fire. So in this situation, your king would be allowed to move if that's what you'd like to do. Or you could put a blocker in between so that he's no longer in check. But he's not allowed to castle. Okay, so that's just a rule. He's got to be safe. So now if black comes over here and does this, well, now your king is no longer in danger, and now it would be okay for you to go ahead and castle. That would be just fine. And then if the queen takes, you can take the queen back, and the game goes on like normal. Okay, and for our other new rule, we're going to just do a silly little sample game here. Let's say that happens, and then let's just say this happens, and then this happens. So once your pawn gets to the 5th row here, call it the 5th rank, it's a special spot for a pawn. And okay, so just quick history lesson. Back when chess was first invented, pawns couldn't do 2 on their first move. The rule was they could only do 1 every single move. And so way back in the beginning of the game, when pawns could only move 1, if you ever got your pawn to this spot right here and black made this move, well, then you would obviously just capture it. Or you could capture it. You didn't have to, but you could. Or same thing on the other side, right? If you go out 1, I can capture you. However, when they changed the rule and said, well, we're allowed to move pawns 2 on their first move, what happened is this F or this D pawn, they can actually pass right by your pawn. And hey, they didn't give me a chance to capture it. I wanted to capture him when he took one step forward. Instead, he went running by me and didn't give me a chance to capture. And so there's a rule in chess. It's got a French name called en passant. It means in passing. And it basically says like, hey, if you try to run past me, it only happens right here, right? Because this is the only spot where you can run past me with 2 steps, right? All the other steps, they're just going to be moving 1. So this fifth row is the only time when you can actually run past me. And so if you ever try to do 2, I can leave it alone and I can play some other move and we can just continue with our game of chess. But right then and there, right the moment you passed me, if I want, I can capture you. And it's very bizarre looking. I still take like I normally would. I pretend you only moved 1. And then I would just capture you, right? Your pawn would be gone, and I would be living here on this square D6. But if you try to run past me, that's the way it works. I move over to D6, and this pawn goes away. Oops, sorry about that. And that's the way it works. It looks a little goofy. Now, if this guy tries to run by me, it doesn't count, right? Because this guy could just walk forward. And there is no en passant when you're on the 6th row. And from black's perspective, if black were to go one more move and then white were to, again, if they go 1, you can just capture me. So you have to pretend like they're going 1. But if he tries to run past me in passing, 1, 2, you move diagonally and this pawn goes away. It disappears from the board. It's captured. Just as if it moved 1, right? If this guy moves 1, you can capture it. If this guy moves 2, well, you can still capture it. And that guy goes away. So that's called en passant, and it's kind of a rule that doesn't happen a whole ton in chess, but you got to watch for it when you're on this 5th row. Sometimes you'll have this kind of string of pawns, and they're all protecting each other. Maybe, let me just slide these guys over. And maybe at this point, this guy will run past you and you just capture him and he's gone. There you go. En passant. You can say it like a fancy person. All right, so we are going to analyze a game here. I chose a game by 2 beginners and they were actually playing a speed game here. So not a lot of thinking going on. And I just want to make a quick comment that I don't think as a beginning player you should be playing speed games. I think 3-minute games and 5-minute games and even 10-minute games are all too short. And you start to get pressured because if your time runs out, you lose the game, right? There is no checkmate. There can be a checkmate, but if you run out of time, then you lose. And the problem with time games is it forces you to think quickly. And I don't think when you're trying to learn this game, you should be rushing your moves or thinking quickly or moving quickly. So I encourage you to play 15-minute games or longer. Or if you absolutely insist, then play a 10-minute game. But I still think that's too short of a game for a beginner. So either have no time limit or have a half-hour game or a 20-minute game or 15 or something that gives you time to analyze the board if you need to sort of think things through, if you get into a complex position. I play time games, but I've also been playing for 40 years. And so you sometimes you play a time game because you want to just hammer through a bunch of games while you're waiting for something. You're waiting for the water to boil while you're cooking dinner or something. And so you want to hammer through a really quick game of chess and you don't want to have it being a deep, like drawn out, thought out game. So anyway, this is a time game between 2 people. I don't even care about their names. And my whole goal in showing you this video is the 2 questions you see on the side of the screen. I want you to start asking yourself, why did they do that? They're going to make a move and we got to ask ourselves, well, why on earth did they just make that move? Because I promise you, and especially against beginning players, you can almost always read their mind on what they're about to do. And second is you got to constantly be asking yourself in this game, is there a threat? It's really easy for beginning players to just think about themselves. So if we're the white pieces and we're just thinking about our pieces all the time and we're not paying attention to what black is doing, then that's a huge problem. So you have to constantly be saying, is this guy lining up a threat And what is it they're trying to do? If we can figure out what they're trying to do, then we can stop it. So the opening moves are pretty straightforward on this game. So let's take a look. Here we go. So we have some king pawns, just like I told you, moving minor pieces, and instantly white is doing something I don't necessarily want you to do, which is to play with the queen. You can do it if you really insist, but I don't think it's great. There's a check from black, so black has two of their minor pieces and a pawn going. So they block the check. There's their other center pawn, so they're trying to establish control of the center. He defends it. He moves forward. My neighbor's dog is barking. Okay, so once again, this guy has this guy all bottled up, hasn't moved this guy out. In fact, this knight is going to have a hard time moving to that square. So if this knight's going to move, it can't move here, and it can't move there. So I guess if this knight's ever going to move, it's going to be on the edge of the board. This guy's bottled up this way, but maybe he can move here. So not a great development from white, but let's just see how this plays out. Moving the queen over. Why is that? Maybe that's our first time to ask, why on earth is white moving their queen over? My guess is she's kind of boxed in right here, and this guy probably likes to play with the queen, and so probably wants to give her a way out so that she can start attacking things. What is this guy up to? He's trying to take our rook. So again, what's the threat? They just moved in and they're threatening to take one of our really good pieces with one of their sort of medium piece. So you got to do something about this, right? You either got to put somebody in between or you got to get this guy out of danger. He gets him out of danger. Queen, king. Why on earth is this guy moving the king? Okay, let me back up. Let me show you something here. This is called a pin. This knight is pinned. He's not allowed to move. In our last video, we talked about if you were to move this knight, then he wouldn't be there anymore, and this bishop could capture our king. So it's actually against the rules to move this knight. You're not allowed to. So my guess is when he plays this move up, he's trying to undo this pin, and what that implies to me is he wants to move his knight. So I think white is probably going to move their knight on the next move. So if you were playing the black pieces, you might say, well, there's not a bunch of great places for this guy to hop, so he's probably going here next. Just something to think about. There we go. Oh, and we called it, right? He was trying to undo that pin so he could move his knight. White moves his queen back. I'm not totally sure why. My guess is because he wants to let this guy out to battle. So I can't think of any other good reason. Unless he wants to come over here, but the knight is guarding that square and the knight is guarding that square. So I don't think the queen wants to come this way. I think she's just getting out of the way for the bishop. Knight grabs a pawn. Queen moves over to make a threat, right? What's the threat? Oh, my knight is all by himself. Get out of there. Take, take, take. And that's check. Blocks it. So now we have another pin, right? This knight is now blocked and cannot move. And, oops, I'm doing that a little fast. He brings that out. He takes, I take back. Why is the queen sliding over? What good did this do? Maybe the rook wants to come over and get into the action. Maybe the queen, now that this knight is gone, maybe the queen wants to slide over here and put a check on our king. That seems pretty likely. So again, anticipating, if I know what you're about to do, I can prep for that, right? I can either get my king out of danger, or I can maybe move some pawns, or I can reroute my knight so that he can block, right? Maybe I move my knight here, and I know you're going to do this, and then I can kind of come over here, or something along those lines. So this guy pushes a pawn. He's got to deal with this situation. So he runs away. I push the pawn again, and here comes that queen. So the power of being able to predict what your opponent has in their brain is going to make you so much better at chess. To say, I saw this coming from a mile away, because right back here, right here, This guy just slid his queen over. And people don't usually just make random nonsense moves in chess. They usually have some sort of goal. So that's kind of the key, is why did they do that? And then what is the threat going to be? And this is what the threat is going to be. So after we go through this, the king has to get out of there. And here comes the knight. Now you're threatening. This guy's going on the offensive. Here comes the bishop. And now there's a lot going on with this queen and this bishop. And then watch this. Boom, boom. And believe it or not, that's checkmate. And it's not obvious at first, but this knight is actually checking the king. But actually, the queen is also checking the king. They call that double check. So this is, it doesn't happen that often in chess, but sometimes when you get a piece out of the way, they both end up checking the king. And so the king has to move, right? The queen could capture this piece, but that doesn't deal with this threat. Or I could move my pawn to deal with this threat, but then that doesn't deal with this threat. And since you can't eliminate both of these guys at the same time, the only way out of it is moving your king. But the queen has all of this covered, and the bishop has all of this covered, and the king has nowhere to go. He's checked, and he's squished, and that's checkmate. So, again, I don't know if that's good or bad play from either side. That's less the point of why we're analyzing this. It's more of the predictability factor of knowing what is your opponent is about to do, and how can you sort of prevent this this wave of pieces coming your way that ended up in checkmate for this guy. All right, let's do it again. This time we'll be on the perspective of the black pieces. And again, two totally different people, kind of a speed game, so they're not making the best moves. Their ratings aren't very high, so they might be beginner type players. And so it's just a chance to ask ourselves these questions of how do we watch for threats, and how do we try to predict what our opponent's about to do. You are not going to get better at this game unless you're thinking from both sides, right? You got to be thinking, what's your plan of attack? What's your plan of defense? But you also have to be thinking about, what in the world is my opponent doing, and how are they trying to checkmate me? So here we go. So far, so good. I don't know why they're moving a side pawn way on the edge of the board. My goal to you was to try to control the four center squares the best you can. So here we go. Knights, knight, bishop. I hate this bishop move. I don't think it's good. This bishop, what's it attacking? It's attacking its own piece, or I guess it's defending its own piece. So that's probably what they were doing, right? Is this knight is threatening to capture the pawn, and so they brought somebody out to defend it. So I guess that's good. The problem is this pawn would have done that trick, and the fact that this pawn can't move means that this bishop is now blocked in. What I do? And so that's a huge problem as we go along. So here we go. Castles, that's good. Brings the bishop out. And now that bishop moves again. So that's another, they say that's kind of a no-no in chess, is try not to move the same piece multiple times in your opening moves, right? That's why I kind of, in my second video, I gave you your first 7 moves, generally speaking, are these pieces and then castling. And you don't want to keep bouncing your knight, or in this case, your bishop all around the board. So now the white pieces have 1, 2, 3, 4 active pieces, and the black pieces have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 active pieces. So they call that a tempo in chess, meaning normally white, because they go first, they're usually 1 step ahead of black. But in this case, because they moved their bishop multiple times, black actually has more pieces into the action than white does. So now here comes another piece right here. Rook moves over, capture. Didn't defend his bishop at all. Again, that's a great example of not paying attention to what your opponent's doing, just thinking about your own things. So this guy brought his bishop out with the intent to pin it to the king, right? So remember this knight is not allowed to move. So black responds by threatening to capture. And what does white do? Well, they're not paying attention to what black's doing, so they just move their rook. So, okay. White moves out, grabbing the center of the board. That's a great place to put your knight, by the way. He captures me, but we capture right back. Another pin, right? So this one's not technically pinned. You are allowed to move your knight. There's no rule against it. But you know that if you do, let's say you moved your knight to right here. Well, now there wouldn't be anything here, and he'd capture our queen. So it's not pinned by the rules, but you probably don't want to lose your queen. So it's essentially pinned. So you block that pin, right? You get somebody in between. Now you can move. Now if he'd just take your bishop, and you would take his bishop right back. So finally, took 11 moves into the game, but finally he's developed his last minor piece, right? He did castle, he did these pawns, and here's his other knight. Now what is this guy doing? So he's taking a pawn, but it's a pawn that's guarded. So he loses a knight just to gain a pawn. Or did he? And he grabs a bishop. Let's back that up for a second. This bishop is completely undefended, and so it's kind of a tougher technique to see for beginners. But black is thinking, well, if I move this knight out of the way, then I would be able to grab that free bishop, that free unprotected bishop. So in the end, these two pieces are going to die, but so is this. And so black, actually, this is a good move for black because they're only losing a knight, which is only worth 3 points. And what they're going to be gaining from white is 3 plus 1. So they're actually going to be gaining 4. So he grabs a pawn, loses his knight, and then we get that bishop. And so we're doing better. That was a good exchange for black to do. A little sneaky. Here comes white. Castle. Capture. Trying to predict what is it your opponent's going to do. And why are they doing it? And why is he doing that? That's a strange move to me. I don't know why he did that. Black does something really also kind of advanced and tricky, and this is the reason I chose this game. One is because I wanted to show you this tricky move from black that looks like a bad move, but it turns out that he gets an equal piece in exchange. And what black's about to do here is another really kind of advanced thing. I wouldn't normally show this in a beginner video, but it's really pretty creative. So if you watch here, he brings his bishop in. And it's sort of the similar before when the knight took that pawn. This bishop dives in and grabs a pawn. And you're thinking, well, cool, I'll just take his bishop right back. But you can't because of that. So, and this keeps in line with what we're talking about, like where is the threat? Well, this guy can't capture because he's pinned. But even worse, the queen is threatening to come down here and checkmate him. She'll be protected, and he'll be squished against the corner of the board. So what does white do in response? White grabs a pawn, which is not going to help him when the game is over. So white, I think, for a good portion of this game was just, doing what they wanted to do without a whole lot of thought. Now, in fairness, black is playing pretty tricky moves here. I wouldn't expect any of you as beginning players to have seen this coming. You have to really be thinking through things and know that right now you have a pin here, which means this pawn cannot capture. It can move forward if it wanted to, but it can't capture because this queen is. So if I were playing white here, I might want to move this pawn out so that it becomes harder because then it's double protected. But you certainly can't leave it where it is. Even when they come in, you still got to do something. You got to probably move this pawn out because then the queen can't get in there. So just watch what the threat is. And this is obviously the ultimate threat. So when you take a pawn, it just tells me that you're grabbing material without being worried about winning or losing. Okay, and that's it for this lesson. I think you should go play, dozens of games where you sort of slow it down, don't play time games, and really think about what your opponent's doing. And remember, especially playing against other new and beginning players, it's not likely that they're paying attention to what you're doing. And so if you're paying attention to what you're doing and to what they're doing, that's going to give you a huge leg up, because I promise you those other beginner players are so focused on just trying to figure out what it is they want to do or what piece can they grab. And so their moves are going to be very transparent and very obvious. When you slow down and sort of ask yourself, why did they do that? And are any of my pieces in danger? What's the threat? So see you next time.